asking, who could take a 6-year-old boy and murder him? And who? We needed to know. We needed to know. And today we know.
In this episode, we will be discussing many things, but most importantly, Jeff's time in Florida, his life and crimes at his grandmother's house, his learning of and his entry into the child-ridden Milwaukee gay scene, his spree of druggings, his evasion of suspicion from his family and law enforcement, his arrests, and of course, his murders. Again, there's plenty more than that we will be discussing. Most of this documented, yet ignored by many reporting on Dahmer's life and crimes. I want to say thank you to all those who watched my previous videos and subscribed, and thank you for tuning in for this one. Now, let's start where we left off. Dahmer arrived in Florida with little money and quickly ran through what he had after staying in a motel for a while, but soon he would be sleeping on a beach and eating out of the trash. This would actually lead to a job offer after Jeff was found digging in the dumpster in the back of Sunshine Subs in Miami. Dahmer was discovered by Ken Halpert, the manager, and feeling Dahmer needed help getting his start in Florida, he gave him a job. Things were going well for a while. With his new income, he was staying out of a motel again, and even met a girl he says he was not sexually interested in any way. Yet they both considered marriage, as she was born in England and was staying in America illegally. The 7th of July, 1981, a few weeks after starting, Dahmer would show up to his new job at Sunshine Subs. Usually working morning to evening 12-hour shifts, he had made multiple trips out to the dumpster that day and the day before. Sometime in the afternoon on the 7th, Dahmer approaches Ken about something he never mentions to investigators or the detectives he spent 60-plus hours interviewing with. As per the police report, according to Mr. Jeffrey Dahmer, the victim was an adult derelict living at the rear of his business in the meter room. The victim was always seen walking around on Collins Avenue and had been complaining of ill health. The victim was discovered by Mr. Dahmer face down directly south of the meter room on the gravel. According to Ken, the man had to have been there for days, as he saw the skin was blue and flies surrounded the corpse. The alley was trafficked not only by Dahmer but by others who worked the shops in the same vicinity. If dead as long as suspected, where was his body located upon and hours after his death? The man lived in the meter room some 20 feet away. This man also ate out of the same dumpster Dahmer was eating out of just a week or two before. Dahmer surely knew the man, yet his discovery and his death, both possibly by Dahmer, is nowhere to be found in his confession that was told to be so thorough it convinced many that he was responsible for the deaths he confessed for and not one more. One death, an accusation in particular, comes up more than others.
They aren't going to go out. 2 FBI agents call me up and say, look, you've got to talk to Dahmer.
It was July 27th, 1981, when 6-year-old Adam was kidnapped from a Sears department store at a Hollywood mall. 2 weeks later, and 125 miles away, his head was found in a canal west of Vero Beach. It is this man, convicted murderer and drifter Otis Toole, who is believed by many to have killed the boy. Toole has confessed to the crime and recanted 2 times.
That in most cases isn't it ain't true.
What isn't true? Tell me what.
I didn't do that case.
In the following years, countless leads were followed. It all resulted in 10,000 pages of reports. Now, after numerous court battles, the media has won the right to search those files.
Mrs. Walsh, your reaction to the ruling, please?
Would you please step out of the way?
She was bitter and angry, the mother of Adam Walsh. Surrounded by attorneys, Reve Walsh had come to the courtroom specifically to address the judge, to ask that he not release the investigative files into the murder of her son 14 years ago. Last fall, after endless arguments, the media convinced Circuit Judge Leroy Moe to open the files. It was agreed the information would be put on microfilm and turned over to the news media no later than noon tomorrow.
And the release of this material will not be prejudicial or cause irreparable harm to the state or to its case. Based on that, the emergency motion to stay is denied.
When the Walsh police file became public in 1995, Harris did something apparently no other journalist in America thought to do. He read it, all 7,000 pages.
You believe you know who killed Adam Walsh?
I believe I do. It was Jeffrey Dahmer.
Adam Walsh was last seen being tossed into the back of a blue van. 2 weeks later, his remains were found, and ultimately the murder was blamed on Otis Toole. Toole and his accomplice, Henry Lee Lucas, were known not only to be serial killers but also serial confessors. In 1983, Toole confessed and recanted and was then dropped as a suspect just a year later. At first, he included Lucas in the killing. Then that changed. He later said that he remembered it being towards the beginning of the year and young Adam was wearing pants and mittens. It was peak summer in South Florida. Of course, he was later picked up as a suspect again and posthumously was found to be the killer of Adam Walsh in 2008. The face of Adam supposedly being found in the bloodstain on the floorboard of Otis's beige Cadillac. In 1991, Dahmer's face hit the screens across the nation and the world. The same month, Adam disappeared 10 years ago. 2 witnesses immediately recognized him as the man they saw that day in the mall Adam Walsh was abducted from. In total, 7 came forward to positively ID Dahmer as the perpetrator.
So as it turns out, after the 2008 public records release, and they released more after they closed the case and said it was Otis Toole, there were 7 police witnesses who found him there and spoke to and showed them pictures of Otis Toole, and they said, no, that's not who we saw. And then I showed them pictures of Jeffrey Dahmer, and they said, yes, that's who we saw. But the police weren't interested in that. Would you like to ask why?
Rooting out the previous owner of the sub shop that Lionel mentions in his book, South Florida investigative reporter Arthur J. Harris locates the aforementioned Ken Halpert. After talking with Ken and former employees of his business, it was disclosed they also shared the lot with a pizza shop, and wouldn't you know, they made deliveries with a blue van.
Darlene Hill, once a co-owner of Sunshine Subs and its sister restaurant, said employees borrowed the blue van all the time.
If you worked there or what you knew where the keys were, you could take them.
It would be in this time that Harris finds out about the body Dahmer discovered and the meter room. In this same meter room, positives for blood splattered on the wall, an axe, and a sledgehammer. In the medical reports on the head found in the canal, cuts that match those made with a scalpel.
Jeff, as Billy has told me, as we've been talking for 10 years, Jeff knew anatomy extremely well. He was teaching anatomy to Billy. I can put a scalpel in Jeff Dahmer's hands. Would you say that Otis Toole, a noted blockhead of somewhat less than high intelligence, would you say it would be likely, Russell, that he would be handling a scalpel?
Not well.
In 2008, it was case closed on Adam Walsh's murder. Police named Otis Toole, saying he was long the prime suspect in the case and that they had conclusively linked him to the killing. They declined to be specific about their evidence and did not note any DNA proof of the crime, but said an extensive review of the case file pointed only to Toole, as John Walsh long contended. Toole had twice confessed to killing the child but later recanted. He claimed responsibility for hundreds of murders, but police determined most of the confessions were lies. Showing up to work drunk and disheveled a few times too many, Ken fired Dahmer. It was with the help of Halpert that Dahmer was staying at the motel, and so Jeff found himself homeless once again. Jeff's belongings from Germany had been sent to his last known address and showed up at the doorstep of Lionel's home. For a while, Lionel had no clue where Jeff was, but soon his son would be on a plane back to Ohio. Just 2 weeks of being under his father's roof again, and he gets his first mugshot after getting thrown out of a bar. Oddly, the mugshot seems to me to say July 1981, but maybe there's a better explanation for this. Not long before Jeff arrived, another young man was staying at the residence that Sherry was helping get to his feet, and in return, the yard was kempt. The prodigal son was not entirely welcome in Bath, Ohio. Lionel had grown accustomed to the equitable style of his second marriage. Sherry had a job of her own to go to instead of being confined to the house as Joyce had been, and they looked forward to meeting each other in the evenings. It was a peaceful, unmolested life. There had, it is true, been a lodger for a brief period, a young man whom Sherry wanted to help and who returned the favor by keeping the yard clean. But otherwise, the domestic scene was firmly adieu. Who this man was, where he went, or what happened to him is unknown. Regardless, it was determined Jeff could not stay there any longer. It was soon decided that Jeff would move back to Wisconsin to live with his grandmother.
Well, right now we're at least I am looking for Jeff to come live in some. Nothing so far hasn't appeared. Beautiful day outside. Nice day to be alive.
And we're coming upstairs from the basement. I'm gonna go in the backyard through the back door.
Okay.
Walking over here on the side. See all the bars in the windows down there? Jeff and I put all those bars in to make them more secure.
In December, Jeff moves in. In January, he acquires a gun, a .357 Magnum. Somewhere in those weeks, he had landed a job at a plasma center as a phlebotomist. Where Jeff got the money to acquire the gun is not stated, but we know he went broke in Florida and returned to Ohio to spend the days getting drunk while unemployed. If Jeff landed the job immediately upon arriving in Milwaukee and somehow gained the willpower to avoid spending his limited income on alcohol, his purchase of a firearm at this time would be a major one. He would have to save with this aim in mind for weeks. Why was he so determined to get a firearm upon his arrival in Milwaukee is unknown. It is told his grandma later found it, and Lionel, flying all the way from Ohio, took it from Jeff and sold it. She also found a mannequin in Dahmer's room, but remained oblivious to his later activities in the basement. The question remains, where did Jeff get the money from, and why did he require it upon his arrival in Milwaukee? Besides his alcoholism, his occult practices also followed him to Milwaukee. Not long after he started at the plasma center, he would drink blood to see what effect it would have on him. As with each residence he stays at, he soon set up a satanic altar in his so-called Christian grandmother's house, drinking blood and setting up altars. Of course, there's nothing ritualistic about Dahmer's crimes in any way. In August 1982, he would earn his second mugshot after exposing himself in public at a fair. Soon after, he would be fired from his job at the plasma center for poor performance. Lionel and Sherry would then have Jeff and Catherine, his grandmother, over for Thanksgiving in Ohio. No word is mentioned they had any idea of Jeff's arrest. Back from Ohio, and Jeff would begin to take the Bible seriously. As Masters said after Dahmer had studied the Satanic Bible, these were the first stirrings of an interest in what Dahmer mistakenly referred to as Satanism. True satanic practice lies not in the Satanic Bible, but in the ancient religious practices of those named enemies in the Bible.
In the spring of '89, the dead bodies of 13 victims, one of whom was only 16 years old, were found mutilated and buried in a common grave near the American-Mexican border in Matamoros. This satanic drug-smuggling cult believed that sacrificing humans in bizarre rituals would give them magical protection. The victims had been dealt blows with a hammer, and some suffered horrible mutilations, including the removal of brains, hearts, and other organs that were then boiled in blood.
So he had the idea that if he were to preserve a part of the person, the skull, photographs, skeleton, then it wouldn't be such a waste. He drew for me a picture of what he meant to develop. It was of a very simple table on which he had skulls lined up facing forward. There would be a full skeleton suspended on each side of the table. Above the table would be a face looking down on the action. He wanted to be able to recline in this throne-like chair and admire his handiwork of the skulls and the skeletons with candles burning, and had the magical idea that perhaps if he did that and did it just so, he'd be able to get in touch with some kind of higher power or evil power that would embolden him and make him able to commit these crimes.
Dahmer would now begin to collect unemployment, and his actions for these years between are hazy. The last time he would see his mother before his arrest would be Christmas 1983, when he flew out to California to stay with Joyce and David. We're told he began to walk the straight and narrow, but with all of that alone time and money he didn't have to work for, the perfect conditions would be set for him to waste away with his alcoholism, but he doesn't. For these few years, Dahmer would take his time with the scripture, with his grandma at his side the whole time.
He then had what I'd refer to as almost a religious conversion in reverse. He began to think, well, maybe there's a devil, and maybe it's my destiny to carry out the work of the devil. He began engaging in all kinds of bizarre incantations.
In quick succession, this period of Jeff's life ended, and his verging into the underworld escalated just as fast. He lands an overnight job at the Ambrosia Chocolate Factory in January 1985, which he quickly uses to acquire a drug used for insomnia that is not typically prescribed for long-term usage. Dahmer would receive 18 prescriptions ranging from 30 to 60 pills over the course of his crimes. He would start going to bathhouses and drugging men, literally testing the amount it would take to knock a man out. He would do this for months, with no repercussions, until a man was sent to the hospital and woke a week later after entering into a coma. The police took information, questioned Dahmer, and nothing was done. Dahmer would clash with a local bartender and threaten to shoot her. After being kicked out of the bathhouse, he would go to the clubs and stalk men, luring them back to a hotel room. After drugging these men a few times and supposedly getting his sexual gratification, he would then take it one step further, though he would have no memory of doing so. This spiraling into the underworld, all stemming from a note dropped into his lap while he was reading at a library.
He describes an incident where he was sitting in a library reading, and a man passed him a note, which Mr. Dahmer interpreted to be a proposal to become involved with this fella in homosexual activity. Mr. Dahmer reports he turned that down at the time, but that began to get him thinking about getting back into homosexual activity, and clearly with the homosexual activity to move more down the line of becoming involved in the killings.
The trigger that sent Dahmer down his spiral of infinity land was a sexual offer from another man whom supposedly knew Dahmer was a homosexual. After this day, Dahmer would give up, as we are told, on any form of restriction. He was determined to give in to his desires. He started reading porn mags and going to gay bookstores. He would learn about the bathhouses and the clubs. He would involve himself in the gay scene. He would even try to molest his brother while he was visiting at his grandma's in the same year. On June 6, 1986, Jeff's first known prescription would be filled for Halcyon, a drug not lightly administered. This is usually a last resort for patients to begin to get sleep, but in no way is it meant for long-term use, likely due to its ability to wipe memory. Dahmer had already begun to frequent gay establishments, most notably Club Bath, Milwaukee. Dahmer had acquired these drugs with the full intent of using them on unsuspecting victims. Each victim he would keep in the room for hours. If they woke up too soon, he would up the dosage, meaning he was there for when they would awake on occasion. 6 patrons complained in the summer of 1986 and named Dahmer. The establishment was well aware of his activities. Jeffrey L. Dahmer was kicked out of a Milwaukee bathhouse in 1986 after being accused of drugging other members in his private room, said Bradley Babish, a former bathhouse manager. All the complaints were the same. He got them drunk and then drugged them. They just got sick. Nobody ever wanted to press charges, Babish said. Dahmer was finally barred from the bathhouse because a man he drugged couldn't be revived. He was taken to a hospital where he spent 7 to 10 days in one hospital, Babish said. The police followed up right afterwards. They talked to Jeffrey, they talked to the employees, and they didn't think anything was serious enough, so they didn't investigate any further. If police would have investigated at all, they would shortly find out this man had also drugged over 10 other men using prescription pills meant for extreme cases of insomnia. The charges involved here are lengthy, yet as you will see time and again, it seems Dahmer had a free reign of the city and police would turn off their ability to think and shut down their senses when Dahmer is involved. The only repercussion Dahmer faced was a ban from the bathhouse, which allowed his testing for months. This, as we know, did not stop Dahmer. "I thought I'd take a couple sips to make the guy happy and get on with it," he said. "The next thing I remember, I was out in the common area fully clothed and somebody told me he had drugged me. His interest in me didn't seem to be sexual," the man said. "It seemed to be to get me to drink. Maybe he was experimenting with me to see what it would take to put somebody out." Feeling this freedom, Dahmer would expose himself in public 6 more times without apprehension, though it would eventually catch up with him. The month before his ban, he was handcuffed and arrested after being identified as the man who had masturbated in front of 2 preteens earlier in the day. He would be put on probation in March 1987 and have to attend counseling. A few months before his arrest, officers would drag Jeff as he fought them out of a bar after he had been refused to be served due to his drunkenness. In response to the refusal, Jeff threw coins at the bartender and threatened to shoot her, bringing into question whether he really had his gun stripped from him. 4 police officers were required to hold him down and take him into police custody. He remained at the police station until 1 p.m. that day, released on his own recognizance against the charges of disorderly conduct, threatened to injure, and city hindering. The charges were never brought to court. After his ban from the club bath Milwaukee, Dahmer would begin to poach victims from a location away from privacy and lure them into his room where he would again drug them and stay in the room with them for hours. His new laboratory was the Ambassador Hotel, and again, he would drug multiple men he met from the clubs without complaint or repercussion. Taking a man he met at the bathhouse to the Ambassador, the man would rent his own room. Dahmer would still drug the man, only for him to wake up in his own room hours later, naked, not knowing what happened or how he got there. Jeff had dragged a completely unconscious man around the halls of a popular hotel, completely unnoticed. In this same year, 1987, it is found he signed up for a membership at Man's Country in Chicago. Given that Dahmer would take a bus or a cab everywhere he went, it is a wonder what drove him to venture into Chicago. At weekends, the 219 is packed, wall-to-wall people in Dahmer's words, and the spillover might go next door to C'est La Vie, or to the corner bar, the Phoenix, where there is no dance floor and conversation is rather easier. None of them is squalid in any degree, but rather pleasant and agreeable. Jeff was a regular customer at the Phoenix and the 219. He was also a regular at the C'est La Vie, which was known to hire young men to serve the bar for a room to stay in. Throughout, the bar was also known as a pickup place for young boys being sought by older men, and John's own predilection for hiring the cutest and youngest men he could find certainly didn't detract from that reputation. The upstairs of the bar was also available for lodging, and many of the young men saw his start in the gay community in Milwaukee by taking a job at C'est La Vie and living immediately above the bar. Supposed police harassment was a commonality at each bar Dahmer frequented. Around 1978, an investigation began on the C'est La Vie. When bar, boarding house, and barely legal are combined, trouble follows. After 1978, C'est La Vie became the target of continuous police harassment. Undercover detectives, posing as lovers, rented rooms in the building to build a case. This same establishment also hosted so-called chicken nights. C'est La Vie was known as a pickup place for older men to cruise younger men. The bar specialized in hiring the young and attractive, including doormen, bartenders, and dancers. Chicken Night welcomed the 18 to 20-year-olds for a special Saturday happy hour. In the 90s, the bar went into something of a decline, mostly due to the neighborhood. The Club 219, which for a while was the largest and most popular gay dance club in Milwaukee, was eclipsed by La Cage. To keep up, the bar became less of a mainstream bar and became a specialty bar. Its shows were either drag shows or young men, almost boy, strippers. A former bartender at the locage recalls police coming in guns drawn for a wanted felon. One night I was paged by security to come to the front door, where a police officer with a drawn shotgun was tapping on the door and signaling us to open it. I was asked to open every door in the bar, Jackie explains. You can imagine how scary this was. Moments later, over a dozen cops came into every entrance at once with their guns drawn. No one knew what was going on, but the police got their man. He was handcuffed, thrown on the ground, and carried out. As it turned out, he was a wanted felon who wasn't allowed in the bar, but somehow found his way in, and the police were anonymously tipped off. Over in Chicago, at Carol's Speakeasy, the weekend of May the 18th through the 20th saw a Chicago Police Department crackdown on gay bars, the likes of which have not been seen in Chicago since the late 1950s. Carol's Speakeasy at 1335 North Wells was the site of one of the most serious police action when 11 men were arrested for disorderly conduct in the early morning hours of May 19th. In no way is this indicative of the so-called neglect that the gay community faced in the rampage of Dahmer. Instead, it shows quite the opposite, with clear police involvement that some have even called harassment. So how do we explain the neglect of Dahmer due to his sexual orientation, but also the supposed police harassment of these gay establishments?
I was in the bars often. Nobody asked me about anybody. I didn't have any police officer, any detective come up to me and say, "What do you know about this person or that person?"
How could one man kill so many for so long without being detected by police? The answer, in part, according to some, is a law enforcement community which is slow to investigate gay-related crime.
On Thanksgiving Day 1987, Jeff and Catherine would have relations, who are not named, over for the feast. While dining, a certain scent might linger in the air. There are many aromas that excite the senses during such a meal, though there's one most would be unfamiliar with and would very well ruin your appetite. And that would be the smell of a week-old corpse. 6 days before Thanksgiving, as we are told, Dahmer would meet and lure Stephen Tuomi into his private room at the Ambassador Hotel. Working 6 days a week and getting Saturdays off, Dahmer would build a routine off of this schedule, which always ended up with him dismembering the corpses on Sunday. Again, these were not ritual killings. In the early morning hours of Saturday, he and Steve shared a taxi to the hotel. Dahmer had already prepared the drug mixture for Tuomi, but before he was dosed, he and Dahmer had consensual sexual relations. Once the mixture took effect, Dahmer would reportedly lay with him before falling asleep. All of these months of practice would sure come in handy for what happened next. In a state he could not recall, he would kill Steve in one of the most brutal and taxing ways possible by smashing his chest in with his fists. Waking up, Dahmer would be on top of the body of Steve, who was hanging off the side of the bed with blood coming out of his mouth. He knew right away the man was dead. Dahmer's ability for precise violence, while unable to recall doing so, would make him a perfect candidate for the previously mentioned programs ran by the military. It just so happens his highest passing grade in college was a B in riflery. How he maintained this grade while under the influence most of his days in college is not easily placed, unless of course an efficient alter would take over during this task that would require sober attention and above average hand-eye coordination. Regardless, he quickly stuffed the body into the closet and bought the room for another day. Later in the afternoon, he took a taxi to the mall and came out with a new piece of luggage. Back at the hotel, he would stuff the body of a grown man into the trunk and carried it out of the building and threw it in the back of a cab. No one was the wiser. What he did with the supposedly bloody sheets is not stated. What is known is he brought a body home just in time for Thanksgiving, and it was disposed of the weekend after. For a supposed unplanned event, Dahmer handled it quite well. He took the body home and left it in the basement, which was not unfrequented by Catherine, given the litter box was down there, along with the washing and drying machines. The body stayed in the basement for well over a week. Still, Dahmer would go to work and have family over, all the while the smell would gather day by day. Taking the well over a week old corpse out of the luggage on Sunday while his grandmother was at church, He would skin the corpse, cut it to pieces, and smash the bones in a sheet to prevent the splinters from scattering across the basement floor. No doubt when Catherine would return home, the house would smell significantly worse and the trash would be flowing with a substantial amount of bags. Supposedly, Dahmer also kept the skull, boiling it and then bleaching it, a process that would take a significant amount of time.
After the first time that Mr. Dahmer killed, he then went for 9 years without killing. But then after this hiatus, he wakes up in the Ambassador Hotel with a dead body next to him. He then had what I'd refer to as almost a religious conversion in reverse.
Playtime was over for Dahmer, as he would now fully embrace what he was to become, or what he thought he was to become: the devil. Soon he would be going out to the clubs, greeting strangers with yellow eye contacts in, watching The Exorcist to become possessed, rocking back and forth, speaking in tongues, keeping the skulls of his victims and building his final altar. Dahmer would now become the Milwaukee Monster.
He really identified with the Emperor. He wanted like that mind control. He had those, yellow eyes. So Jeff actually found some place where he could get contacts that were yellow eyes. And so before he would go out at night, he would put the contacts in. He had to get himself charged up by trying to emulate a devil or evil person.
And Jeffrey put on the Exorcist 3 movie. And Dahmer was starting to get into the movie, so he wasn't concerned about the other couple. He started this crazy motion of sitting and rocking back and forth in a chair and making these strange noises and talking like in tongues.
Less than 2 months after the killing of Tuomi, and Dahmer would take his first victim back to his grandmother's house. Bobby Simpson would be brought back to West Allis. He and Jeff stepped through the front door, and after drinking Dahmer's coffee, he would pass out to wake up with Dahmer standing over him naked. He managed to escape. How he did this is not stated, but he details the time as 11 a.m., making it likely that Catherine was awake for the event of a drugged man running out of the house from the basement. Outside Club 219, which again shared space with the next door club C'est La Vie that was known for hiring young boys who would stay in apartments above the bar, Dahmer would run across Jamie Doxtator, who was a 14-year-old prostitute. For $50, around $130 in today's money, Dahmer would take Doxtator to West Allis. In the basement, Jeff gave the kid the drug mixture, and soon he was lying flat on a sheet in the middle of the basement. Jeff claims he strangled him in his sleep, along with many of his other victims, claiming they did not suffer. He didn't want them to suffer. Later autopsy reports of the surviving remains would tell a different story. He hid his body in the basement and then went upstairs to have breakfast with his grandma. Over the week, he would take the corpse out and violate it before dismembering it and tossing it into the trash.
He kept the corpse of Doxtator in his grandmother's fruit cellar for about a week, and when alone in the house, would bring out the body and make sexual use of it.
Again, the smell would have been incredible and unmistakable for anything else. He severed the head of both Steve and James and attempted to keep them, but this method was unsuccessful in both cleaning them off and retaining them, as they apparently became too brittle and would be destroyed. Soon, Richard Guerrero's head would be cleaned and successfully retained, and even make it into Dahmer's new apartment. March 24th, 1988, Dahmer paid $50 for Guerrero to come back to the house at West Allis, and he strangled him in his bed, leaving his corpse upstairs while Dahmer went down to have breakfast with his grandma, who was soon off to church. Richard, like Jamie, was a prostitute and had a criminal record dating back to 10 years old. Dahmer would next pick up Ronald Flowers in April 1988 when he failed to make him a victim. Flowers tells of Catherine interrupting Jeff's plans, and as a result he would be let go, but how exactly this happens is not clear. Flowers tells of being in the house for multiple days. Catherine claims she saw a bed made for the man. Jeff states the same morning he drugged Flowers, he would be put on a bus. Regardless, Flowers would eventually wake up in the hospital, but with no trace of the drugs in his system. Police would question Dahmer at the West Allis house, but took it no further. This man who had a history of being questioned for drugging men and just got off probation would again escape police suspicion. Soon after this, Dahmer would be pushed to get his own place. On September 26, 1988, Jeff moved out of his grandmother's house in West Allis. On the very first day of this new life, Jeff approached a 13-year-old Laotian boy named Somsak Sintensen Phone and took him to his new place, apartment 204 on North 24th Street in Milwaukee. It was 3:30 in the afternoon on Monday, the 26th of September. A student at the Milwaukee School of the Arts, Somsak Sintensen Phone, felt the presence of a man walking behind him on North 25th Street. He said he had just acquired a new camera and wanted to try it out. Somsak was wily enough to ask if he would need to strip or pose with his clothes on. Not 24 hours after Dahmer moves into his new apartment, he would be handcuffed and arrested in front of his coworkers on charges of second-degree sexual assault and enticing a child for immoral purposes. Taking Somsak to his new apartment for $50, he would drug and assault the child, whom Dahmer let go for him to return home, barely keeping his eyes open. Failures to wake the kid up at his house would result in his hospitalization, where it was discovered he was drugged. After leading the police to Dahmer's apartment, they shortly found his place of work. A search of Dahmer's house would yield implements used to drug the boy, but according to an interview with Dahmer located in the FBI files, what went undiscovered was the skull of Richard Guerrero. No mention is made that Somsak was a prostitute like Jamie or Richard. As Masters would call it, Somsak was wily for asking whether he would have to strip. And yet, in Ann Schwartz's book, she lists out each of the victims' criminal records. And wouldn't you know, Konarak, the later victim of Dahmer and the brother of Somsak, had previous charges on prostitution. News reached the Dahmer family, and Catherine would bail Jeff out, and he would move back into her house. A few days later, Jeff was released. Once again, he looked as he had so often on such occasions, embarrassed, ashamed, deeply depressed. "I'll never do anything like that again, Dad," he assured me. But with this assurance came another lie. "I didn't know he was a kid," Jeff said. In fact, the boy had told Jeff his age almost immediately after meeting him. Later, talking to the judge, Jeff would again lie. Jeffrey Dahmer appeared before Judge William Gardner at the Safety Building in Milwaukee on the 30th of January 1989 and pleaded no contest to the charge of second-degree sexual assault. He claimed the administration of the drug was accidental, that he had not noticed a residue in the cup he had himself used earlier. Jeff was found guilty, but his sentencing would come at a later date. In the meantime, Jeff would return to his lifestyle. Unhindered by his upcoming date with the judge or increased scrutiny by his grandma, Jeff would slide the contacts in and walk through the doors of the 219. Near closing, Anthony Sears would approach Dahmer. In the back seat of Jeff Connor's car, the friend of Sears, they would ride a few streets off from Catherine's house. In time for Easter Sunday, Jeff would drag the corpse to the upstairs bathroom for collection just after breakfast with Grandma, keeping Sears' skull and his scalp and his genitals.
And we went up to the bedroom and laid around. He was making some comments about getting to be early and he'd have to leave. Went down and made a cup of coffee with some pills. He fell asleep. And that's when I strangled him.
His grandmother slept through it, had no idea.
Buying a 10-gallon plastic tub, his process of preservation involved keeping the parts in acetone on the floor of his closet.
He had a nice-looking face, so with the head, I cut that off, put it in a large white barrel, filled it up with acetone, and that preserved the head.
On the approach of Jeff's sentencing date, Lionel would come to town. He had packed most of his clothes, but as I went through his room, I found a small wooden box with a metal rim. It was about 1 foot square, and its lid was tightly sealed and locked. I had previously found a few pornographic magazines, and I suspected that he had stored others in the locked wooden box. Since I didn't want my mother to happen upon such things, I demanded that he open it.
In a way, I'm glad, but in a way, I'm not glad that I didn't press it, because if I would have opened that box and found what was in there, I think I would have lost it. And the next day he opened it and he said, see, this is what it was. And in fact, he had stuffed some pornographic magazines in there.
But we now know the box contained a human head.
Yes.
Not one to tell the difference between a rolling skull and flat paper magazines, Lionel took Jeff's words that it was what he thought it was. Not to disturb Grandma, they agreed to open it in the morning. Lo and behold, the box contained just what Lionel thought. In between said time, Jeff would make an unscheduled visit to his work and deposit the box in his locker. This action would go unquestioned. Jeff was sentenced to a year in the House of Corrections due to the work of Gerald Boyle, who would come to represent Jeff during this trying time for the family.
Including the victims and the victim's family, and of course feel great grief for their son. It's a very fine and wonderful family. His father, Lionel, is just a marvelous man, and he is hurting as badly as anyone.
And when it was all over that day, Judge Gardner believed him and opted to send Dahmer into the community. The prison system offered no alcoholic program at the time. Gardner told Dahmer that if he sent him to prison without the treatment, you'd probably come out worse than you are right now. On the second-degree sexual assault charge, he stayed a sentence of 5 years and put Dahmer on probation for 5 years instead. He ordered Dahmer to spend 1 year in the Milwaukee County House of Corrections under work release so he could continue his employment. Instead of prison, complete with barbed wire and barred cell doors, he would go to a correctional center, which was more like a dormitory. On the charge of enticing a child for immoral purposes, Gardner stayed a prison sentence of 3 years and scheduled probation to run concurrently with the 5-year term. In the end, Dahmer would serve 10 months in jail with work release privileges and would be on 5 years probation, during which time he had to report monthly to a probation officer. He was to have no contact with anyone under the age of 18. He was also told to get psychological counseling and some type of inpatient or outpatient alcohol treatment. That was it. The sentence could have been 10 years in prison. The story gets stranger after Jeff is released on Thanksgiving 1989 to go see his family. In November, Dahmer was granted a Thanksgiving pass for 12 hours. He was supposed to be back at 10 p.m., but he did not return until 4:55 a.m. Jeff would come in contact with the self-proclaimed street preacher John Paul Ranieri, who spoke of a sober lifestyle and would later be one to claim Jeff was actually straight and told of his hatred for gays and blacks. Dahmer would tell a different story about his time with the preacher. There was a picture of the preacher, and Murphy showed it to Dahmer. Do you know this guy? Dahmer took the newspaper and studied the picture. His eyes widened as he viewed it. Wow, I can't believe it. Yeah, I met this guy once. On Thanksgiving Day, 1989, he woke up in a strange apartment and found himself hogtied and suspended from the ceiling. Dahmer told police he had drunk too much and blacked out before waking up in the unfamiliar apartment. His legs were tied together, his arms were tied behind his back, and he was hanging by hooks and ropes from the ceiling. The man was sexually assaulting him with a candle. Dahmer would return late and hungover with no incident. In this time, where he was supposed to serve a year in the House of Corrections, but was released 10 months into his sentence, Jeff would seemingly be on a tight track. He would be released March 1990, and just after 2 months of couching at Grandma's again, he would have the keys to the apartment of 213 dropped in his hands.
Writing stuff down. And he said to me, but Pat, when I tell you what I'm going to tell you, first of all, you probably will hate me. I said, Jeff, I've seen a lot of evil stuff, right? There's nothing you've done that would freak me out, right? I said, I've talked to a lot of murderers. I said, besides that, I don't believe in judging people. We had this discussion about God, and I said, I'm not here to judge you. That's not what it's all about. I'm here to solve this problem. And then he said, well, when I tell you this, Pat, you'll be famous.
send me out here. I'd like to thank you for watching my video and thank you for making it this far into the video. Any and all comments are welcome. Any and all disagreements are welcome. Please feel free to discuss in the comments. Any questions, I'll do my best to answer. And I'd enjoy your speculation on the case as well. I'd also like to let you know I do have a Patreon and a Ko-fi if you'd like to financially support the channel to get these videos out quicker. Any and all support is welcome, whether that be like, sharing, subscribing, or donating. Thank you.